Hi, Tim. And hi, Danielle.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
I'm sorry, we seem to have got mixed up on the times. So I was just happily passing some time watching a movie.
I'm really sorry if I've messed things up.
It happens very easily. It's just gone 8 o'clock in the evening here. What is it where you are?
9 a.m.
9. So that's 11-hour difference. So we just need to remember that for future. Okay. So we haven't met.
Can I check? Is it really okay with you to speak now? Because this is your Sunday evening.
It suits me very well. I was settling down to basically pass 3/4 of an hour waiting for 9 p.m. to get here. Now I can start right away, and I've got the rest of the evening. But, you know, I'm a widower. I have a family of me and a cat. I don't really get out. I don't have any jobs, any emeritus positions or any such things. This is what I do. And so I'm a pretty bored person if I don't have these sort of discussions going on. I'm delighted to spend some time with you.
Well, we're very lucky people. Daniela, I think it would be really good if you introduced yourself.
Okay, well, thank you very much to the both of you for organizing and for your time. My name is Daniela Canderi. I work in the UK, in Exeter. I'm Italian, and my background is philosophy, but I actually work in the medical school. And my interest, well, I'm a lecturer in public health. And at the moment, one of the main subjects I teach is leadership in public health. So complexity and inclusive and compassionate leadership. And one of my research interests is mental health and well-being of healthcare practitioners. And I've also done research on end-of-life care, particularly in oncology setting with the European School of Oncology. And I think that's, yeah, enough.
When you studied philosophy, what were your interests?
Oh, well, I studied in Padua, so it's mostly a continental approach. And there was a very strong Aristotelian component. But at the time, I was very interested in Heidegger and Wittgenstein. But I ended up doing my kind of thesis in philosophy of biology for very, very strange reasons. So yeah, I can expand if you want, but I don't want to.
No, that's quite enough. Anyway, that strange choice gave you a career path, which can't be all that bad.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry.
I just say that strange choice to study the philosophy of biology gave you a career path.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, it has a reason, but yeah, I've had a very tortuous path. Yeah,
I think that applies to us all.
But much to our advantage, Daniela, that your tortuous paths brought us into our country. Andy, you missed one important thing in your introduction of yourself, and that is you didn't tell us the name of your cat.
Oh, Peekaboo.
Peekaboo.
Because he's a stray cat. He was picked up off the streets in Sunshine, which is a very poor area of Melbourne. And I got him from the lost cats home, so to speak. And the foster parents gave him that name because he did that thing cats do of putting their paws over their eyes when they sleep, as if he was playing peekaboo. Which, if Daniela doesn't know, it's a children's game where you say peekaboo. Right.
Yeah, I know.
He's a bit of an old cat now, suffering from hypothyroidism, and we've had some scares. I've been rubbing the medication in his ears, and I gave the prescribed dose, but the reaction was he didn't eat for a week. Scared shit out of me. I thought it was end of life, but I reduced the dose by 50%, and he's about right. He's no longer panting, like, you know, he's out of breath, and he's eating well. So He's happy now.
He's got an overactive thyroid.
Yes.
So what is it you're rubbing in his ears? Is it carbimazole?
Look, I
No,
don't have
don't
the
worry,
name.
don't worry.
Yeah, yeah.
Just,
it's to reduce the activity of the thyroid.
I'm a thyroid doctor, so I'm really excited. But anyway, we should talk about sort of things that will allow Daniela to get on with his day and you to get to,
Okay.
I think go on.
What I had in mind to do, not knowing at the time Daniela's background, but was to bring you to activity theory from absolute fundamentals. Or I could just say, here is the concept of activity, and we could start from there. Are you okay with that? Yeah. So I will try this, and you let me know if this is a useful track, because the sort of central problem of philosophy, modern philosophy down the past sort of several centuries is how to begin, from which point to begin, because philosophers always aspire, of course, to think logically, not to just randomly have thoughts that appeal to them, but to think in a logical way, aspiring to the precision of mathematics and like sciences. But they can only do that given they have a clear starting point. Now, Descartes tackled this problem, and he's, in a sense, as I said, like the beginning point for modern philosophy. So came to the conclusion that the only thing he could be certain of was his own existence. And from that hypothesis, he attempted to unfold a system of philosophy. Of course, he took it for granted, like a drunk person who thinks that they are a very good driver, you know, or an uneducated person that thinks that are much more about vaccines than these experts. We are actually not very good in perceivers of our own mind. On the other hand, you had empiricists that said, no, it's what's given to us in the senses. These are the certainties that we can start from. But of course, what the empiricists miss is that we basically, in what we see around us, we get reflections, or if you like, images or representations of the social situation that we're in, the kind of life and culture that we have, like that Eskimos know all about different types of snow, and other people know all about different types of sand, right? So this is a theme in philosophy. Now, another way of approaching this is to talk about substance. The idea of substance goes back to the Greeks and Aristotle and so on. So the idea of a substance is these are the things, the most basic things of which a view, a way of looking at the world takes as basic and aren't reducible to other things, right? So the word substance, of course, in everyday language sort of means stuff, because in our everyday life, we assume that the world is made up of stuff, right? And that there are different kinds of stuff, you know, there's different chemicals, different types of crystalline formations, manufactured goods, even living animals and things, even human beings, but it's all stuff, right? But the limitations of that is, of course, that in important ways it isn't all stuff, because you're a good old materialist that says everything is material. You say, well, a unicorn's material. I have an idea of a unicorn. Is that material? Well, this can create a lot of confusion. You say, well, your thought of it's material because you're a material being. You say, oh, okay. But there's a difference, isn't there? if a unicorn come running down the street and say, there's a unicorn, that's not the same thing as my idea of a unicorn, right? And Descartes came up against this problem as well, that all the things he found in the world, that's one thing, that's matter, what lay outside his consciousness, which you could perceive, which you could think about. But the ideas he had in his head were something else. They don't obey the laws of gravity. The thought of a liter of water does not weigh 1 kilogram, doesn't weigh anything at all. Right? So in his attempt to find a substance or substances like earth, fire, water, and air, so it goes back a long time, was confronted with the problem of dualism. That trying to get the most basic starting point in philosophy, that you're confronted with this problem. Well, you know, it isn't everything is matter and all obeys the laws of nature, matter, you know, gravity, electrical attraction, you know, molecules and waves and things, because thoughts don't. And this is important because, in fact, all we have are thoughts. Yeah. What's beyond the thought is sort of something else, right? The idea is our thoughts are about the world, but and a thought may be more or less useful, but it's not the same thing, right? So from the beginning of modern philosophy, we had this problem that as near as damn as you could get to a single substance, say everything is so-and-so, you're still left with really two things, sort of thoughts and matter, thought and matter. And this is a problem because when you've got any kind of dualism, not just the classical thought and matter dualism, but any kind of dualism creates a problem, because if you're we're talking about things that are basic to a point of view, then, and if you've got two of them, that you can't sort of build a logical understanding of more developed things out of these two elements, because, can I put it, it's what is, you know, where did these two come from, right? It's a strange thing. Stop there a minute. Are you with me in what I'm saying here? Daniela, I mean, you're experienced in this kind of talk, so you're okay with the way I've posed this question? Yep, good, okay. Now, this is the background to activity theory. Activity theory, taken as a philosophical view of the world, is like Hegel's theory, a monist view. It is successfully overcomes dualism. It's a view on the world that is built on a substance which is simply human activity, right? Human activity isn't matter and it's not consciousness, right? We all know what activity is. You know, it's not a mystery thing. This is a concept that's found in everyday speech, and this is important, right? But that's single stuff. Now, the thing about a monist philosophy is that it really doesn't matter what you call that one thing. Hegel called it thought or sometimes spirit. It doesn't matter whether you call it activity or thought, because you're going to build a whole system out of one thing. And when it's one thing, it's what name you give to it is sort of secondary, right? But of course, words have connotations. So if we said, oh, it's all matter, then that's confusing, because matter is what is we assume lies outside of our consciousness, right? I assume that this, what do you call it, remote control here is a real material thing, different from my idea of it. And if, for instance, my glasses weren't right and I reached out and grabbed it and I'd had a distorted image of it, I might miss it, but there's still something there. And I may have a a more or less adequate idea of the world, but there's still a world outside me in which my ideas in some way have to conform to that, right? So I can't, so that's what matter is. It's something which exists outside of consciousness, and it's the source of our knowledge, our ideas, but it's not the same as our ideas, because ideas are what our consciousness is. And in a sense, when we look out in the world and think about it, what we have is our consciousness that guides what we do, and we hope and presume that our consciousness is a good guide to the way the world is and will help us do the things we want to do successfully, because we recognize there's a difference between the world out there and our idea of it. So matter has a definite meaning, and it doesn't mean everything, including consciousness. Now, why does activity as a substance, how does it get around that? Because activity does not mean that if I'm cold and I get goosebumps. Forming goosebumps is not an activity. It's not activity. It's something my body does, but it contains no thought component. It's simply the reaction of one bit of meat to its environmental conditions. But generally speaking, when I'm talking about activity, and I'm not thinking of things like, my digestion, right, or my goosebumps, I'm thinking about things I do. And those things that I do are essentially the thoughts, right? Now, two people may do exactly the same thing from a physical or material point of view. One may do it hoping to help out a person. The other one may do it with the intention of killing them. Maybe the same thing, but it's not the same action, is it? Because the intention and the concept you had in doing it is an essential part of what an activity is. Now, this does mean that an activity isn't immediately given to you by looking at it, but you still know that activities are real things, right? I've slipped over to using the plural, which is, I'll come to activity and activities in a minute because there's an important difference. But when we talk about matter, we can fall into the illusion that we can see it, and therefore it's unproblematic, the nature of it. But of course, that's rubbish anyway, because, it takes considerable chemistry and microscopes and all sorts of things to bring out the nature of matter. It's not just given to you in senses. You have to do certain things, and from the results of those actions, you draw conclusions about what you say the thing is. And it's the same with activity. In activity, which is supposed to be, an act of charity or an act of crime, could be the same, of course, but that requires some analysis to decide what it is. So it's not just an activity. It's not just the physical movements. It's a specific kind of combination of mind and physical movements. Likewise, the word experience can have the same meaning. And the pragmatists like Dewey use the word experience in that way. Of course, there's experience is also the fundamental word for empiricists, but they understood experience as like a sponge that soaked up whatever was thrown at it, whereas the American pragmatists like Dewey and so on, they understood experience as an active thing. Your consciousness developed through your action. Another word is practice. See, people talk about theory and practice. That's a mistake. A practice that isn't in some way connected to a theory is not practice. That's just, can I put it? It's just happening, right? So across, whether you're a pragmatist, an activity theorist, or an educated Marxist, there are different words you might use. You might use experience, or activity, or practice. But there's this concept which unites not a human being as a lump of material, but as a human being as something which is active in the sense of moving and causing things in the world with the ideas and the reasons and the consciousness and the intention and the level of understanding and feeling that they have in doing it, right? So activity theory is a view of the world that names that fundamental substance of reality, activity, right? Now, I might say, just take a step to the side, what is natural science? Well, natural science is, of course, something different from philosophy, right? You can talk about natural philosophy and, you know, but philosophy and the natural science parted way somewhere in the mid to early 19th century. The natural science is that type of practice which is based on the assumption that there exists an external world that can be described in a way that is lawful and can be known by human beings and described by them. And it sets out to describe the nature of that external world. So the problems in drawing a line between philosophy and natural science, of course, came at the end of the 19th century with the issues, I think, first of quantum mechanics. And it was very confusing for people because it seemed at first that it was untenable to talk about a natural world that existed outside of human activity to be able to describe it, because your description seemed to depend on human activity, right? Now, this created a lot of confusion. Of course, there exists a world completely independently of human activity, and its nature isn't dependent on human activity. But there is no way that a human being can interact with nature and find out anything about it other than through a specific kind of practice. So if you set up a dual slit experiment and point a ray gun at it and pick up what happens with a bit of photographic paper on the background, you get certain surprising things that seem to defy both the light, so the wave and particle theories of light. Now, when you try and describe what happens in that strange experiment in terms of there is a thing out there and this is what it's like, you find that neither describing light as a particle nor describing light as a wave is adequate, right? And that sort of flummoxes people. But the fact is that our conception of waves and particles, you know, balls that you throw around and sounds that you hear, is based on a certain world of experience in which you don't have things like ray guns shooting photons at photographic plates and so on, far less watch solar systems evolve and so on. You know, we have a limited range of experience and we are accustomed to concepts which are appropriate to that range of activity that we do. So when human activity moves beyond the everyday and starts measuring the speed of light and exploding atoms of one onto the other, we observe things which clearly are qualitatively different than the things that we know in everyday life. But that's simply because of the expansion of human activity beyond the everyday. And that, you know, when you get involved in electronics or even get involved in motor cars and internal combustion engines, new concepts come along. Peekaboo's going to introduce himself. Come on, Peekaboo. Come on, get in front of the camera, Peekaboo. Here he is. He doesn't like being handled. So he's got a little box where he can sit next to the keyboard here and get strokes. And he's not really supposed to walk in front of the camera, but since he got mentioned, there you go. So, natural science is this particular type of science where there's a relative validity for assuming that the subject being investigated, or the object being investigated, if you like, is something that exists independently of human activity. And what you end up doing when you describe objects of experience like this, in a sense, you describe the kind of practice where if I do this with this kind of instrument, this is the result. And we describe this particular setup in terms of there existing a thing outside of human activity that I interact with, because we're natural scientists, right? So we describe things in that way. We don't just talk about what I do and what the results are. We describe it in terms of things that exist independently of human practice. And most of the time that works very successfully. The idea that, see, I have a concept of a chair. Now, the concept of a chair is really the idea that you can have a bit of reasonably solid material which someone can put their ass on that allows them to work at a table and be at the same eye level with other people doing the same and get a bit of certain kind of support, right? And people work in factories producing these things with this concept in their mind. And people running hotels put chairs around the table with this concept in mind, right? So there's a whole concept which a certain society has in mind, which we call chair. And that's a shared concept that exists, you know, whether in the manufacturing industry, the hospitality industry, or in everyday homes. But we talk about it as if there was a specific kind of material thing. But we know chairs can be in just about any shape you can imagine. You know, they get weirder, you know, especially since they started Japanesizing our workspaces and so on, that produce very peculiar types of chairs. And what characterizes a chair generally is its place in the system of human activity, human practices, as providing places. I mean, it didn't always used to be chairs. In the medieval times or early medieval times, the king had a throne, but everyone else either stood around, sat on the floor, maybe sat on a carpet, sat on a box, right? Chairs were a modern, relatively modern invention when ordinary people thought they should have the same sort of rights as a king. And you don't, you know, I understand in Saudi Arabia, you get invited into someone's home and they put you on the floor and that's okay. They don't have chairs in that setup. But in a Western home, you invite someone in, you don't make them sit on the floor. You offer them a chair and you talk, you know, so the concept of a chair is not just a description of an independently existing body. It's really a concept of a form, a very elaborated form of social practice, which involves the distribution of them, the making of them, the recycling of them, the purchasing of them, all these kind of things that work together. But so there's a whole range of human activities that are united in this idea of a chair. But as with a lot of activities, there's a material object or product which is at the center of it, and we reify the concept onto that object. Right? We say that that's a chair. We don't say, you know, and we don't use some peculiar form of words which refers to, you know, this is the thing you're going to sit on. You know, you mean a chair? Yeah, it's a chair, right? So, but not everything can be reified in that way. Lots of forms of human practice are nothing but practices. I mean, you take a university. What's a university look like? What's its shape? Yeah, often you can say where it is, but where it is tends to get a bit fussy, you know, because they tend to have international campuses and get spread over a whole time, you know, and you've got Northwestern University doesn't have a location at all in America. But we talk about it like it's a thing, you know. Where's the university? I'm going to go to university. I work in a university, right? Because the university actually is a form of human practice where you have lecturing, studying, awarding of degrees, provision of libraries, and a whole set of related sub-practices, including, what's the word, chartering or something from the Crown to award degrees and so on. A whole interrelated set of practices that are part of a whole concept of the community, which makes university. So keep this fuzziness in mind, right? Now, in trying to understand all this fuzziness of things that turn out to be quite intangible, like a university or a demonstration, we're out to understand these things as forms of activity. Now, activity is a substance like water or air. It comes in large masses, but you also a large mass of activity, right? Like you have a large mass of water, but you also have units of activity, and this is really crucial. And there was a particular line of thinking that begins actually initially with Goethe and his morphology. Goethe is credited with for clothing, for something or other, is like a forerunner of the concept of a cell, right? The word escapes me for the moment. In fact, cells were postulated by others, but Goethe's systematic approach often means he's credited with the idea of a cell, because and in fact in the preface to Capital, first preface, Marx says the cell of bourgeois society is the commodity. It's a cell because it's the smallest unit of wealth, or of value, to be more specific. And it's really important to identify that unit, that single thing. So I'm introducing here an idea which is key to this whole line of philosophy, from Goethe to Hegel to Marx to Vygotsky through the activity theorists, is the concept of a unit of analysis. Because if you approach some phenomena like art, how do you start to scientifically understand art? Well, according to Hegel, you have to start with a work of art. You can't make a beginning otherwise. But if you can consider a work of art, this work of art, that work of art, you try to understand why is it taken to be art? Why does it have value other than its usefulness, and so on. You study a work of art, then you can develop a theory or a science of art. Likewise with, if we're making activity our basic unit of reality or of human life, we want to know a unit of activity, right? Now, throughout the latter part of the 19th century, up until Vygotsky appeared on the scene after the Russian Revolution, there were two main strands of psychology. One, sometimes called cultural psychology, studied the human mind by looking at its products in literature and art and ethical systems, religion, looks at the cultural products of the mind and took them as being the, if you like, manifestations of the human psyche, which could be studied scientifically because they're there. Someone makes a film, you can watch the film, it teaches you something about the human mind and everything else. The other strand was what they call brass instrument psychology, where, you're old enough, Tim, to know I've worked in a lab with brass instruments. I've worked in them myself. There's lovely things in your head. What's his name? is one of my favorite old German scientists of that period. I'm going to forget his name, but measured the time it took for a nerve impulse to travel from the tip of a finger to the brain. What an amazing thing to do in the 19th century, to measure the speed of transmission of a nerve signal. So you're really getting down when you could do something like that to understand the psyche as a material process, see? So then you particularly, I mean, the dominant stream of that brass instrument psychology is behaviorism. And of course, behaviorism doesn't allow any talk about consciousness at all. It's regarded as an unscientific concept. And of course, on the other hand, the cultural psychologists that are studying the human mind from its cultural products and don't pretend to be able to look into the mind either. Right? They're both looking either at the physiology or the behavior of human beings in order to try and deduce things about the mind, even though if you're in Pavlov's laboratory, famously, you're never to talk about the objects as having consciousness. They're just a system of conditional reflexes. Okay, now Vygotsky came along and he did a beautiful thing. I mean, this puts him on a platform with Einstein or somebody. He worked out a unit of analysis for the study of general psychology, which was the artifact-mediated action. So whereas a reflex is a stimulus response, you know, hit him on the hand, you'll say, ow. Oh, very interesting. Of course, it tells you nothing about the mind at all. You keep hitting him and he stops saying ow. Ah, that's interesting. You know, maybe he's getting sick of saying ow, but of course, consciousness and getting sick of something. So you invent all these kind of pseudo-material processes, like the reflex wore out or something, you know, silly sort of things. And in Russia, the psychologists are even forced to have things like the linguistic reaction. So if someone said something to you, what you said back was like deemed to be a reaction. Anyway, Vygotsky came to this idea that if you looked at a subject doing something, but this personal level, single subject doing something, such as acting on another person, but not necessarily, and using an artifact to do so. Right? Artifact is a product of the general culture, out over the horizon of the individual person's experience. No one knows who invented our language. It was there when we were born, and it's still there when we leave, right? It's just there for us, right? It's obviously a human product. That's why we say words are artifacts. But it's not produced in the course of an interaction. It's available to you when you want to talk to somebody. So when you talk to someone, you use this artifact, and at the same time you act directly on the person. You're doing two things at once. They hear you, right? And what they get is your meaning, not if I say stop, you don't hear the word stop, like that's a word beginning in S and it means bringing something to a close. You know I'm telling you to stop it, right? So there's a direct relation between the subject and object, and it's also mediated because of the use of the word. Okay, and those two things act together. And it's actually that Hegel said in founding his system, he says there is nothing in heaven, on earth, in heaven, or anywhere else that isn't both immediate and mediated. He didn't say everything is mediated. He said there is nothing that isn't both immediate and mediated, right? Because in analysis Hegel did of the history of philosophy, he looked at, there were, if you like, sort of, what do you call it? The terrible thing when you get to certain ages, you can't get words. The sort of antique philosophers were not aware of a problematic subject-object relation. They just took it that you could say what was in the world, and that was it. And then rationalism and empiricism came along and started saying, well, our relationship to the world is a mediated one. We don't have immediate relation to it, which wound up in Kant. And Kant famously has this concept of the in itself, the world in itself, beyond our sensation. And that's mysterious. We can have no experience of it. And for Kant, our senses and the categories through which we see the world are a barrier between us and the thing in itself. We can never get behind it. All we get is the categories that we already know, the senses that are part of our internal organization, not what we're looking at. And then there were the other people that wanted to say, we do have an immediate access to the world just as it is. Typically, I think the Descartes, who thinks that he can reason it straight through, and through reason, he can apprehend the world as it is. And then there was Jacobi, who's a contemporary of Hegel's, and Hegel, of course, makes the point that after hundreds of years, these people had never got any further. Jacobi thought that through faith, one could immediately commune with God and understand fundamentally what it's all about through faith. Now, he saw in philosophy these two lines, that the necessity for immediate contact or experience with reality was needed and had to be affirmed, at the same time could only be made sense of through the gifts of our culture. You know, he says something like, I know America, not only because I'm here in America, but because I've been there. I've traveled from where I was to get there. And that's just a metaphor he used. So Vygotsky developed a unit of this thing activity, which was what we say is the artifact mediated action. And this appears in different forms in different branches of Vygotsky's work. Classically, it's word meaning. That is to say, a word which is a sound, but it's not just a sound, like if I drop something, that's a sound. If I say blah, 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 that's a sound, but they don't have any meaning, right? So a meaning that isn't conveyed by sound, which is sure, look, you know, my choice of a blue shirt or something that's conveying meaning, but it's not a word. Okay, but word meaning is this unity of the two. And he hypothesized that an understanding of word meaning expressed the relationship between thinking and speaking, because humans evolved as both thinking beings that would produce sciences and machinery, you know, great literature and art and so on, not like any other animal. And they're also characterized by thinking. And there was a lot of people thought that understanding the intellect is a lot to do with understanding language. And that's a belief that's not without foundation. You know, so he thought the idea, if we can understand the relationship between thinking and speech, and then trace the development of that, development in the sense of from an infant that doesn't have any thinking or any speech, to infants that have elementary intelligence, like practical intelligence. They learn to grasp things and tell the difference between their toe and the shoe, right? There's something that wasn't part of them and something that was part of them. So they develop a practical intelligence, and they start to have words, but the words are used in a peculiar way. They're not used intelligently. They're used like gimme or I want. They're used sort of much more like an animal cry. But then in development, the two come together, and the child starts to use words intelligently and starts to think with words. And then you have the child that says, oh, reach up to the Bicky tin, bring Bicky tin down, open biscuit tin, oh, and he can have a biscuit. Remember to put the biscuit, commanding themselves like their mother commands them, coordinating different activities as if they were being told to, but commanding themselves. And then this spoken loud speech gets briefer and briefer. They leave out the subject. They just say, reach, shut. You know, the single word is enough to express the whole thought. Gradually, the egocentric expression dies away. And we know that for a while, you know, when you're faced with a difficult problem, words come to you and you're trying to think it through. Eventually, the words disappear, right? But along with the words disappearing, you know, you've mastered thought. Yeah? And you don't just think one word after the other any longer. You certainly don't have to speak it out, but you can trace the development of thought from its non-existence through to its young adult form by tracing the development of speech and observing the different ways he uses or got to use the same idea of people with problems, giving them an artifact like a memory problem and giving them a memory card to help them remember, and watching how they use the memory card, or getting them to sort blocks into groups to try and solve problems, and watching how the card is used, how things are formed into groups, and tracing the development of the intellect, right? And he did that on the basis of making a unit of analysis, the artifact mediated action. Now, that's the foundation of the entire school of thinking, whatever branch of activity theory, whether it's Engström or Leontief or, you know, Mike Cole or you know, whatever, you know, Hedegaard or somebody else, they all begin from that. Now, majority stream of Vygotsky's followers in Russia developed the concept of activity. And so the action is the smallest unit of activity, but the sort of founder of activity theory as a current coined the idea of a molar unit of activity. Molar as in 10 to the power 26 molecules, right? So it gives you, it's a large measure of amount of a substance, which is, but it corresponds to the intrinsic nature of that particular element. So yeah, not only do you have an action, in order to make sense of human activity, you have activities, right? One activity, two activities. So English is peculiar. We use the same word for an activity and the substance activity, but they're conceptually different. Like a tool is a unit of equipment. You don't say an equipment is a unit of tool, right? I'm sure it's the same in Italian. It's not the same in Russian, though, which is very unfortunate, because the translation of activity from Russian into English obscured this difference and confused generations of people, because Russians have great difficulty in handling the articles when they try and speak English. And anyway, it led to confusion. But anyway, we know better. If you look at the whole mass of activity going on in the world, to come to grips with it, you've got to recognize what is one activity. And then what's another activity? You have types of activities, right? And then you see the world then as an agglomeration of activities, probably in some sort of system, yeah, but that's for later. The relationship between activities, important. But the first thing is to be able to distinguish activities, or to Marxist different forms of social practice, same thing, right? Now, what is overlooked in our current of activity theory and Vygotsky is the fact that when Vygotsky, so I introduce you to the most important work of Vygotsky, Thinking and Speech. That's the title of his major opus magnum. So clearly it's about the relationship of thinking and speech. And the chapter 1 introduces you to the unit, artifact mediated action. And what is not particularly made explicit is that the subject of the book is concepts. Same as, see, he really should have called that book Concepts, but he called it Thinking and Speech. That's fair enough. When Marx writes Capital, he calls the book Capital, so everyone knows what it's about. But then the very first page tells you that it's all about commodities, right? But commodities is one thing, capital's another. So why does he start writing about commodities when his subject matter is really capital? Well, because commodities is the basic unit. Capitals, capitalist firms are the molar units. You can't understand capitalist firms without understanding what they're made up of. Millions and millions and millions and billions of commodities or acts of exchange. So likewise, Vygotsky understood that his molar unit was concepts. What he had to understand was concepts, right? And then there's a chapter 5, which is about an experiment watching little children sort blocks into groups. And he describes quite different processes. They don't start out sorting all the red blocks into one group and blue blocks into another. They can do quite surprising things, right? And the blocks have a little symbol under them that they can use, and they learn to turn over and see the symbol and learn to sort the blocks according to that symbol. But they can't do it immediately. It's too difficult for them. Okay, and he describes in this chapter 5 a whole series of what I would say are forms of action that have not yet risen to the point of a concept, right? Where, for example, they pick out one feature and take that to be the concept. But we know that having 4 legs is not the concept of a chair. It's really, the table, for instance, has 4 legs, and the child doesn't immediately distinguish between a chair and a table. He has lots of stories about, like getting a glass of water. You have water, then they see a duck flowing on, swimming on the pool, and they say water. They call the duck water, and then they see their pet dog, and that's water, because they connected the water to the pond that the duck was swimming on, and then the duck to the cute little animal, which was their pet. And that's called a chain concept. And although it's extremely childish, quite honestly, in adult conversation, people chain concepts. They connect A to B and B to C and sort of put A, B, and C all in a row when it's not actually validated because they haven't got the concept right. Okay. And so the thing is that a concept is a form of activity. It's a social practice in essence. The connotation of it is it's a form of thinking, but essentially a concept is a form of practice and so is an activity. So those two writers are often counterposed to each other, but in actual fact, they're working down the same track. Vygotsky was labeled in Soviet orthodoxy as being an idealist, whereas Leontief wanted to prove himself to be, in order to survive, to be a materialist, because this is what was needed in the Soviet Union. So he even calls activity labor instead of just saying activity, to emphasize that it's a working class ideology. So instead of activity, it's a labor process. All sorts of distortions of the philosophy happen because of the environment, poisonous political environment in which it was developed. But that's it. The unit of our culture, taken as a kind of an ideal formation, is concepts. But these concepts only exist because we have a whole mass of different activities. And, like automobile, is a key concept in the way we live, with suburbs, private and public transport, all this whole range of jobs involved, laws, turning of age and getting a driver's license. There's a key concept there in automobile, but it's also a thing, right? It's a thing. It's in the nature of us reifying, where we treat all our practices as if they were things existing in the world. So our culture has this kind of double-sided nature. It's not really double-sided because practices are not simple mechanical movements of matter, human matter through the space. They're actually thoughtful actions, right? So, but it can take on the appearance of an earthly and a heavenly one, but it's actually all activity and concepts, the basic unit of a culture. One other way of looking at practices, which is also a unit of a culture, they're the same thing. So with activity theory, it's a science which takes it that the basic units are not cell and organism, but action and activity, and actions and activities, just as biology has its cells and its organisms. Now, of course, in biology, you do have things other than cells and organisms. You have all sorts of chemicals, you have viruses, you have populations, but the key concepts which anchor biology is the cells and organisms, which are living sort of communities of cells that have their own identity and survival strategies and so on. Right, well, it's the same kind of thing. Actions and activity don't necessarily exhaust the universe, but they're handles onto a theory of the world which allows you to actually talk about modern physics or psychology or industrial processes altogether, really. And of course, if you move into a specialized area, you use specialized concepts. You use certain types of practice, come out, not just practices. Okay, so that is a 0 to sort of 50 introduction to activity theory. I have been recording this, and if you want it to refer to, I'll put it up on the cloud, and you can refer to, but it's not for public distribution because I've just improvised this, and I don't necessarily want to be held to account for something I may have spoken loosely about. Any questions?
Andy, I'm just going to give an advanced apology that I'm going to have to go in about 5 minutes or
That's
so.
fine. We timed it well.
It's been completely golden, and I will, I'm sure, listen several times to the recording. What I think that, I don't know how Daniela's timing is, but I think it would be very useful for us to come from, I mean, I think that's been such a helpful, God, I've been, sort of using the word Vygotsky for 20 years, but only a fraction of that. I think that's a hugely useful way of thinking for us to come at a fairly pure level unmessed up by triangles to our particular piece of research.
Mm.
And I'm absolutely certain that Daniela would do a really great job of throwing those ideas backwards and forwards between the very empirical observations we're making and the concepts and the goals we want to achieve in the research. And I'd actually love to hear you doing that, Daniela, but I won't be able to stay for long right now.
Why don't we just make another time, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, so you have a chance to digest it, and then we come back and I listen and answer questions. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Okay, 1 week from now. So 1 week from when we were supposed to start this time. How does that do?
Well, yes. What I mean, I suppose since the devil's in the detail, I actually think that probably the very earliest that's good for us would be eight your time, which would be 7 hours. Have I got that right? No, it's 9 hours. So, oh God, I'm getting really confused.
It's just gone 9:00 p.m. here. What have you got?
Okay, so we've got 10 o'clock.
10.
Right. So do you want to start at 10 next week, or do you want to start at 9 or 8?
I think, I mean, to me, 9 o'clock in the UK is a perfect time to start, if that's really okay with you.
Okay, so 9 o'clock, 11 hours later, it's going to be 8 o'clock for me, isn't it? It's
If
when we
that's
started.
okay with...
Yeah, that's cool for me. So it's going to be 8 p.m. Melbourne time.
I've grabbed the air time because I'm feeling a bit of pressure of time. But Daniela, I'd love you to come up for air and bounce any thoughts off Andy if you'd like to, and if you've got time. But we've agreed 9 a.m. UTC a week from now. And I will send a message which will be there for us to either agree with or correct about the time of the meeting.
Yep, that's good. I just had glanced at my diary. I am indeed free at time next week, so we're cool. Do you want to say any preliminary things, Daniela?
Well, the only preliminary things is thank you. I need time to digest, and some things were familiar, others were not. So I was very, very I really enjoyed having this introduction, and I will I will just take some time, and also as you suggested, I think it makes sense to meet in a few days, and I will be more talkative then. But thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
It brought me back to my philosophy lectures when I was.
Bit of philosophy 101 in there, isn't it? You know, I think therefore I am, substance and subject. Yeah.
I think that monologue was a thing of beauty, Andy. Thank you. May have been
I didn't know if my voice was going to hang out for a while. I kept having to clear my throat, but
and you know what? Yesterday I've been to Songlines, which is the Australian exhibition on Aboriginal art.
Oh, yeah.
That for some reason is in Plymouth. So I was really fascinated by it. I didn't know basically anything about Aboriginal art. But yeah, it's sorry, go ahead.
It's really beautiful, you know, that there was for a lot of the dot art, which is most famous, is done by very old women in very remote places. Some of them only start painting like in their 60s or 70s. I had to sit down and just do it. And the use of color and the precision of it is just amazing. And another sort of glimpse into this, there was one of these church missionary schools, CITIM, in South Australia, going back sort of 50 years, but they had all these young Aboriginal kids, like a primary school. They never let the kids get beyond primary school level. And they just got them painting. And these kids, young Aboriginal kids out of the bush doing these paintings, like, in a sense, Western paintings, in the sense of painting the scenery that they lived in, was just
Exactly.
like perfect, you know.
And I don't know anything, so I was just kind of exposed to it yesterday, but it's all like almost like a very interesting form of spiritual mapping of the area as well, and connecting to it. And it's almost like comparable to our Iliad and Odyssey, and all these kind of drawings are very,
and they draw like aerial pictures of places.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But they're very spiritual, and they have so much meaning. So I was just kind of saying that also in relation to what you were saying about concepts, and it's also very fascinating. So anyway, I will. Yeah, it was really, and also I didn't know it was the oldest form of art, like continuous in the world.
Yeah, and we had this atrocious thing a couple of years ago now. What is it? Rio Tinto Zinc decided to do some mining for, this must have reached Britain in some way, and they wanted to dig some hole for some fucking mineral they wanted. And in the process of it, they destroyed a cave which was 46,000 years old, with Aboriginal artifacts going back 46,000 years, that had been in continuous use, and even had human material like hair and skin that was 8,000 years old in it. They just destroyed it for some fucking mine, you know.
Yeah.
It's unspeakable. Fortunately, most of these places are so remote, they're free from graffiti and things, because you have to walk 100 miles across the desert to get there, and you don't really go there and say, you know, Andy was here, you know. And the Aboriginals sort of protect them as well. But, you know, we learn lessons slowly, but, you know, they've been given the job of protecting these things and so on. But it's a wonderful heritage, and getting to understand it and relate to it is a real challenge for us. You know, we're really still deported Englishmen living on the other side of the world, or we are not Englishmen any longer, from Italy or Greece or Vietnam or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, strange land.
Okay, I let you go as well, because it's quite.
Of course, you have a day
late.
to get on with.
Yeah, and you were watching a film I didn't understand or something. Or
I was watching a series, and the episode finished. I thought, well, I haven't got time to watch another episode. I'll go over and check my email, and there it was. You know, Tim Dornan's on your personal meeting room. I thought, fuck. But yeah, I'll watch another episode. Should be right. But we'll see you next week, eh?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much.
See you. Bye.